Hey guys, it's Danny. Alrighty, it's very early morning right now. I need to get into the flow, so excuse my voice. Alrighty, today we're gonna try to answer a question that I know some of you do have, and I did have 2 comments lately referring to this. And this is whether or not it is a good idea to use opaque pots with orchids rather than transparent. And this is because, as we might already know, roots of orchids can photosynthesize, at least the epiphytic orchids. The use of opaque pots actually restricts light, meaning the roots cannot photosynthesize anymore. Therefore, as a result, the roots inside an opaque pot with medium will most probably be white or very discolored. And I do have a video, I'll link it down below so you can see an example. On the other hand, if we use a clear plastic pot, we provide light so that the roots can photosynthesize as well. Therefore, the thought of actually impairing orchid development with opaque pots is really not that far-fetched. I can see how things can be a little worrying, and I did have this worry quite a lot of time ago when I started to use decorative containers and I observed the color of the roots. However, along the years, with experience, I kind of realized that it doesn't really matter. And that's pretty much the short answer. Opaque pots are used widely in cultivation, not just me. And so far, I absolutely do not observe any downsides or any bad effects in the development of my orchids by using opaque pots. But wait, there's also a long answer. So to start with the beginning, most roots on epiphytic orchids are capable of photosynthesizing. What does this imply? Well, it implies that the roots contain chlorophyll molecules. As you might already know, chlorophyll is green, and whenever we water orchids and make the velamen translucent, we can see that green pigment in the root system. Therefore, there is no doubt that roots can actually photosynthesize. So the initial thought is that roots have a role in photosynthesis and the production of energy for the orchid, and by us limiting the light, we will impair orchid development. However, that is really not the case. As me, and probably not only me, have discovered, roots are not very specialized in photosynthesis. Yes, they can absorb light energy, but they're not as good at it as leaves. Part of it has to do with the size, of course. Part of it maybe has to do with that velamen layer that covers them, and maybe it limits the light quantity that actually reaches the chlorophyll. And maybe part of it has to do with other processes that leaves perform, such as gas exchange. In the description below, I'll link you to 2 videos that I did a while back explaining the major roles of leaves and roots, what each structure is better developed to do. So I will just take the conclusion of those videos. The leaves are much better prepared to provide energy and to perform photosynthesis for an orchid, while roots are better prepared at water and nutrient absorption. And even though both roots and leaves have multiple functions that they share, they're not as good as the other component in performing that function. Now, demonstrating the light energy that each of these components can absorb is a pretty tricky business. As far as I understand, not even scientists can actually measure so easily the overall light energy that plants can absorb, let alone a person like us who is just an orchid enthusiast and grows orchids in a home or near a home. So at this point, our conclusions come only from experience, what we observe, and of course the little experiments that we can do ourselves. So a way to test and validate this theory that I just proposed, that roots cannot take up the role of leaves in photosynthesis, there is a test you can perform. It's not something you'd like to do, but theoretically at least there is a test. Alright, so if you would take a fully mature orchid and in good health and good development rate and cut away all of its leaves but expose the roots to light, you will observe setback, meaning smaller and smaller structures. And depending on the orchid, this can mean smaller leaves if it's a monopodial. In the case of sympodials, smaller pseudobulbs with smaller leaves. And for all intents and purposes, this orchid was completely established, had a big root system, capable of photosynthesizing. The orchid should not be set back, because the only explanation for a setback is something disturbing the quantity of energy it actually produces. In our case, we are theoretically completely eliminating the main orchid organs that photosynthesize. If roots could absolutely 100% take the role of leaves in photosynthesis, then we would not observe any setback. The orchid would be leafless, yes, but it will continue to grow very normal, at the same rhythm, at the same height, with the same capability of blooming. But as you will probably discover if you stick around in the hobby too much, this doesn't happen. The only logical explanation that we can draw from this tiny experiment is that roots, while they do photosynthesize indeed, and they can provide some energy to the orchid, they cannot fully replace the leaves. But how do I know that this phenomenon actually happens if you'd cut away the leaves? Did I ever cut away leaves on an orchid? No. But I did have quite a few orchids that somehow lost their leaves due to pests, due to sunburn, due to all sorts of maybe other reasons. And I'll actually link you down below to a video. It was the case of the mini mark that lost all of its leaves due to spider mites. Now, because spider mites only eat leaves, not roots, the root system was totally fine on that orchid, and still it went through the setback. Leaves started to grow very tiny, and then as more leaves were produced, the new leaves started to be bigger and bigger. So this phenomenon is something you will actually observe if you're dealing with some sick orchids. And I'm not saying you should cut leaves on your orchid, but it's just a theoretical example that probably sooner or later you will experience. So because of this setback we experience whenever we lose a lot of leaves on our orchids, we can only draw the conclusion that roots cannot take the role of leaves. And actually the quantity of energy they provide is really minimal in comparison to the leaves. Therefore, it comes pretty intuitive that if we cut the light source from the entire root system, the orchid will not actually display any sign of stress or setback or improper functioning, simply because the quantity of energy that the roots might provide through photosynthesis is just so negligible. Especially in the case of orchids that are very well established, they have a nice leaf system, maybe multiple growths, and so on. So now I guess the next logical question is, why do orchids have adapted their roots to photosynthesize since they're just so poor at doing it? Well, because being poor at doing something doesn't necessarily mean being useless. Orchids have adapted throughout millions of years to whatever conditions they're exposed to. And unlike cultivation, conditions in nature are not always the same. They can always vary, there's always accidents that can happen. Today an orchid can be totally fine, and tomorrow her leaves and maybe even pseudobulbs might have been munched off by an animal. There are also a lot of disease and pests in nature. Things are just so complicated to predict in nature that of course orchids need to have a little bit of a plan B. So if an orchid ever experiences complete leaf loss, there is a high chance that the root system will still be there, since the root is not so exposed and it might be very hard to detach from the actual tree or rock. And if complete leaf loss ever happens to an orchid in nature, then the roots will provide a little bit of a head start, a little bit of help for the orchid to continue its existence. Of course it will be set back and of course it will be stressed, but it's better than complete loss of that orchid. So even though in cultivation, photosynthesis of the roots is not an issue we're actually concerned about, and it's not really so important due to our pretty stable environment, in nature, the fact that roots photosynthesize might actually be a great advantage. And because epiphytic or lithophytic orchids have adapted their roots to actually form chlorophyll pigments, this gives us an important insight on their history, their evolution on this earth, and so on. And since the likelihood of total leaf loss is not that small, it simply makes sense for the roots to be able to photosynthesize just in case a bad day occurs. And I'm presuming bad days do really happen in nature. So in the end, my opinion is that clear plastic pots are indeed very useful, but more for the user than for the orchid. We can see the root system through a clear pot, we can see when the medium is dry, and the clear pot can give us a lot of insight on the health of the orchid and of the root system. But does it make such a big difference for the orchid? Well, experience tells me no. This is why when you search for orchid pictures, even awarded plants, you will see a variety of pots being used, starting from clear opaque pots to semi-opaque pots, and so on. Results don't differ visibly, at least, between an orchid potted in an opaque pot or a clear pot in a decorative container versus an orchid with fully exposed roots. And from this point, I think each of us draws their own conclusion. So alrighty guys, this was the topic for today, and thank you for asking this and suggesting this video topic. Hope you've enjoyed it and it inspired you to research this aspect more if you'd like. And you know the drill, if you've enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up, a share would be wonderful. And if you'd like to see other orchids and plants for me on a regular basis, subscribe to my channel, and also don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss a video. So with that said, I'll see you all next time. Bye! Remember I told you I had some praying mantis babies around? Here's one of them. She's so pretty. So yeah, I really don't want to use insecticides just to get rid of some grasshoppers when I have these little guys around and other things. They will pretty much take care of the grasshoppers. So look at her. She's just so small. So pretty. Not sure if I can disturb her, but compared to my finger, look how tiny she is. Alright, baby. I also discovered my hose is leaking. I need to buy another one.